Yo, Dylan.
What's up?
Honest opinion about CrossFit.
Oh, wow, you put me on the spot like that.
Yeah.
Like CrossFit, registered CrossFit, or like CrossFit as a methodology, which is a methodology that can be applied by anybody.
I think we should probably I think I'm more interested in the trademark because obviously we know that CrossFit stems from basically lactate threshold training, which is a form of exercise that we weren't unfamiliar with, but then they came in, labeled it CrossFit. So what I want to know, kind of general, when it comes to fitness fads or styles or whatever, the generalized overview of CrossFit itself. What do you, because I have some opinions. I have some good and bad opinions, obviously.
Yeah.
And I know you have kind of mentioned a couple things.
Yeah, I mean, so from my perspective, I am hardcore into powerlifting and strongman, right?
Yeah.
So I probably fall within the group of people who tend to be maybe CrossFit haters, right? But I kind of have an interesting perspective on it these days, and I've actually kind of had a change of heart, and I would have to say that I really honestly respect CrossFit as a company and actually as a methodology as well.
So what made you switch though? Or change your way of thinking?
Yeah, so as far as the methodology goes, it's pretty cut and dry. I mean, my biggest problem with CrossFit in the past was always kind of just the haphazard programming, that things were just kind of thrown where they were thrown, and that was just all it was. It's kind of almost random.
Yeah.
But as it kind of goes, you kind of see some trends in their periodization. There are some coaches out there who have boxes who are phenomenal programmers, and so it's almost kind of just a user-generated community in a lot of ways, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So you're gonna see the gamut of people who are great programmers at gyms who are putting together some really awesome stuff, all the way down to people who may not be, and you kind of have to as a customer do your own resource knowledge, or just do your own research on that.
Yeah. So I have a question. This is me playing devil's advocate, but I'm curious because you hear all the time haphazardly putting stuff together, and I totally get that. I really do. And you also hear the danger and the potential risk of injury with CrossFit.
Yeah. It's
CrossFit is really highlighted, but I'm curious because you are interested in strongman.
Yeah.
And talk about random shit. I'm curious of do you feel like there's any hypocrisy there?
Well, I guess the biggest difference is that with CrossFit, correct me if I'm wrong, you probably know better than I do.
I probably don't.
But aside from certain CrossFit competitions like Fight Gone Bad or something like that. Fight Gone Bad, you know what the workout is ahead of time and you can train specifically for that. But to my understanding, the majority of CrossFit workouts, especially if you look at the CrossFit Open and the games, you don't really know what you're going to get into beforehand. Yeah. You don't know until the moment of, in some cases, when you show up on the field or at the gym ready to go. So with that, it's that kind of random factor that you don't know what to expect for or train for. Whereas with strongman, you do. You actually know. You'll at least know the events months in advance. Sometimes the weights might not be announced up until kind of closer to the event, and sometimes the weights will change the day of the event, which is always something you just have to be ready for. But because there is something in place that you know that you're going to need to train for, then it gives you an idea of how to train and how to really direct your training over courses of months and even years, and how to have a clear progression. Whereas the biggest thing is that CrossFit is extremely diverse.
Yeah.
From a 12-mile run to a single 1-rep max clean and jerk that's a pretty wide difference in overall technique and ability and energy systems in everything.
And I guess, you know, it's funny because as a personal trainer, we like to pride ourselves on being able to take someone's individual goal and program around that. You know, like utilize what we call the rule of specificity. You know, we want to highlight, you know, if someone's a swimmer, if they're a biker, if they're a bodybuilder, if it's strongman, like, but we want to try to hone in on that specific thing. And interestingly enough, like when we look at like functional training as an example, we now know that it is very specific to the event, like that your adaptations are incredibly specific.
Yeah.
You know, you're an amazing biker and it doesn't necessarily make you an amazing runner or swimmer or whatever.
Right.
And so it's funny with CrossFit because how do you ultimately, you know, the programming is so complicated because it has to be somewhat sporadic, right? I mean,
I guess it does, and that's one thing that still definitely eludes me. I'm not a coach in CrossFit, and it is the overall structure of the programming and what is needed to actually really get where you want to go in CrossFit is a pretty foreign territory for me.
Yeah.
Whereas, I mean, if you look at powerlifting, I mean, you mentioned specificity.
Yeah.
Powerlifters are the ultimate example of specificity.
Yeah.
I mean, for a powerlifter, you know, if you're doing a deadlift, if you're doing sets of 3, that's a variation. Right? That isn't a that is not a true to what your actual competition is.
Right.
If you're doing anything more than a single max effort deadlift, then you're actually doing a variation of the exercise that you're training for.
Yeah.
So powerlifters tend to be really, really exacting in the way they put everything together. And I think, you know, to kind of go back to the hypocrisy of me being in a strongman and everything, well, I think it was that when I started to get into strongman, I started to appreciate CrossFit. Because CrossFit is kind of like strongman, but they tend to have events that go for much longer, and it's like a lighter, longer version of strongman sometimes.
Think it's a volume infused strongman.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. That kind of is, man.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, it really is. You know, they do a lot of like odd events. I mean, if you look at like the burden run that they'll do like a 2-mile run and then have like tire flips and like odd objects to carry and stuff.
Yeah.
That's straight out of the textbook of strongman, except it's, you know, it spans over like an hour-and-a-half event as opposed to 2 minutes maybe.
I think I remember in one of the games having, you know, a line of guys and girls with logs, you know, and it's like moving and they're just walking down.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's bizarre to me. I'll tell you, this last year, just like you, I've earned more knowledge and respect for CrossFit in a greater understanding, and I'm kind of dabbling in it now because it's exciting for me, and I think for me more than anything, it's challenging me harder than I've ever been challenged as a fitness professional. You know what I mean? Like, the fact of the matter is like bodybuilding is not complicated to program. It's not.
Really not.
It's very simple, and we, you know, overloading muscle, you know, to create a growth stimulus is not complicated.
Yeah.
And you know, and don't get me wrong, powerlifting can be complex for sure. But even then, we can track like a somewhat kind of specific linear progression, and like we've got these lifts that we focus on, and
it's much less complex than CrossFit. You have 3 lifts, right?
Right.
You know, it really does boil down to 3 single reps that it comes down to.
Yeah.
Whereas CrossFit, you can really get like just anything. I mean, you can get hit with anything when it comes to competition. You don't know.
I'll tell you, man. Like I'm gonna give you the bad that I see, and what I see is something that is so complex to take as an example. I'm going to use Olympic lifting as an example because we see that, you know, predominantly in CrossFit. We see a ton of Olympic lifting, the snatch, the hanging snatch, you know, the power clean, the full clean, the jerk. I mean, we see all of those lifts and variations within those lifts as well. And you take these movements that are incredibly complex, they're so technical, and you and I both know as fitness professionals that this takes months and years to finesse and to really, you know, teach someone how to properly do. I, to this day, still am not proficient at these movements. and then we're having them in a class setting doing upwards of 20, 30, 50 repetitions. Sure, is the weight moderate in most cases? It can be scaled, of course, but
right.
If we get into the textbook of training and kind of hone in on kind of the fundamentals of personal training, we know that regression and progression are so important. How do you in a class setting take someone that is relatively new to Olympic lifting and regress so far back in the snatch that we can actually give them enough tension to teach them the movement properly? You know what I mean? Without individualized programming and attention.
Right.
So.
Right. And I think they try to answer that question with like ramp-on programs, things like that.
Yeah.
I just don't know that there's any amount of like that you can.
Do you think that ramp-on programs are the equivalent to online certifications in personal training? Like it's like, hey, let's take this weekend seminar or whatever, you know what I mean, and boom.
Right.
You're getting,
yeah. I was gonna say like I just don't know that a week long or a couple days of ramping up to a full-scaled programming is it really a few sessions with a trainer where it's a little more one-on-one? Are you really gonna get the snatch and the clean and jerk? And those are the two that really get all the attention, because those are ridiculously technical lifts.
Yeah. And I mean, how many people do we know that can legitimately like climb a 15-foot rope, that can do 20 unbroken pull-ups, that can do handstand push-ups, walk on their hands? I mean, when we look at like the RX or the not scaled versions of these exercises, man, they are it's intense upper level stuff. And I guess for me, like the way you probably look at strongman is that this is an extreme sport, right? An extreme event.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what makes it awesome. I personally look at CrossFit the same way, and I know it's turned into a mainstream get fit situation, but I find it to be for the mainstream weight loss client, get in shape person, that it's an unnecessary, over the top, risky scenario. Is it competitive? Is it fun? Absolutely. Is it hardcore? Yeah. Is the risk versus the reward just outweighed? You know what I mean?
I can definitely see what you mean, and like it kind of from both sides of the spectrum. Something about CrossFit that I find extremely refreshing is that they kind of have this mentality of like, your body is less fragile than what you think. And they raise the bar and they hold very high standards, and they say, you can do this, you are less fragile than you think, do it, and just get to it. And there's something really refreshing about that. But at the same time, I've seen people injured left and right, not necessarily from CrossFit, but other things. Any physical activity comes with its risks, and just balancing out that risk and reward situation is pretty important as well. Are we less fragile than we think, and do we sometimes baby ourselves? That's true, but that's a delicate balance. You can definitely go a bit too hard and just destroy yourself too.
I can definitely agree with coming from a military background and also being an athlete and I've been training for 10 years, man. Like I like to think that I've really pushed myself, and I know what it takes to see progression and adaptation and change. And anybody that's done that knows that it's not comfortable and that it is intense.
That's very true.
And you know what? You make a really good point. I do like the fact that any fad would bring to the table a more kind of a no bullshit look on it and say like, we're not promising you necessarily like safety, but what we are saying is that it takes an intensity measure to see change. And I think that we, at some point anyway in the fitness industry, definitely pre-CrossFit probably, but we started to see kind of a softening of the industry, you know what I mean?
Definitely would say you're right, There was a point, and it was probably like pre-CrossFit or even in the early ages of CrossFit, maybe 10 years ago or something, where the industry started to soften and soften and soften, and it got to the point where, I mean, if you look on Facebook, and you watch anybody do a deadlift video, and you'll still see this stuff today. If they have anything less than almost like an overly extended spine, you're gonna see somebody comment Snap City, and you're gonna see it, and it drives me crazy. And so I think that kind of exemplifies something that happened in the fitness industry where, you know, it's at a certain point it became form over everything.
Yeah.
And that's the other side. That's the other extreme side of this whole equation that we have here.
Yeah.
Is that, you know, you have some people on the one side who are just, you know, perfect form, perfect technique every time, all the time, and I don't agree with that side.
Sure.
And then there's the other side that just says, you know,
F
charge in and just do it no matter if you're going to injure yourself or not.
Yeah.
And I don't think I agree with that either. It's got to be somewhere in between.
It's like most things, you know. It's same thing when we discuss diet. You know, you get the bro side and the flexible diet side, and on either end we have these kind of extreme ideas, and it's like we really need to meet somewhere in the middle. And I agree, and I've actually said that to FTA students for a long time now, and I'm like, guys, yes, we want to make sure that we are professional enough to teach proper form, create safety.
Right.
However, if you are that detailed trainer, and I can point the NASM trainer out a mile away that just got certified and is super motivated, and he's got them like so upright doing this thing on one leg, and it's like, dude, you're missing kind of the most important piece of the puzzle, which is intensity. Overload.
Yeah.
You know, look, the fact of the matter is, even though as douchey as the bros can be and as extreme and dangerous that can be, they see results. And we you know, a guy in prison can get, you know, jacked by just doing enough push-ups to the point of failure. Like, it doesn't take a huge knowledge base to be able to do that. You know,
it takes grit and it takes intensity. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I think that, you know, you see that dichotomy on either side, and that really, I mean, when CrossFit hit the ground running, they butted heads tremendously. But I do have a lot of hope and a lot of faith in the fitness community, the fitness world, that these two sides and these two conflicting ideologies can kind of find some middle ground somewhere, hopefully sooner than later.
I think when it boils down to it, if I had to say, like, I love CrossFit for a lot of reasons. I think that CrossFit brings the intensity measure, like you mentioned. I always think it was an awesome point. I like the fact that, like, kind of the anti-softening and, like, you know, I'm sorry you're a pretty little flower, but, like, if you want to look like this, or if you want to train like this or be this strong, this is how you have to be. I like that. I also, one thing that has been really awesome that I cannot speak enough about is, it seems to me that the community within CrossFit is very positive, very uplifting, that there's a family kind of, anyone's welcome, and we're here to uplift you. And I'm not speaking for every box. I realize that there's probably douchey boxes, just like there's douchey bodybuilders, but it seems that the mass majority, and the way that I see, like, CrossFit HQ on Facebook and them, the way they promote themselves is not egotistical. It's kind of very down to earth, you know, and that I love.
I'd have to agree with you on that for sure. I went through kind of a phase where I was pretty anti-CrossFit HQ, and it's kind of maybe turned off by some of their tactics and some of the way they try to stir up controversy at first. Yeah. And I've since kind of become a believer. Just, you know, they do a great job of building people up, and that's what it's all about. I mean, do they use some kind of controversial techniques? Yeah, but it's marketing, man. They're doing what they got to do. They're protecting their brand. They're getting it out there, and they're wildly successful.
I know what you mean. Like, I remember the t-shirts with the elliptical and the cross through it, you know, and it was like, we're the anti, like, you don't need a gym, you know. I mean, look,
or like Pukey the Clown in the beginning.
Yes.
Or worse yet, Uncle Rabdo.
Okay, I didn't. Oh my, Rabdo, my life. Wow. Uncle Rabdo. You know,
it was like a picture of a clown, like with undergoing kidney dialysis or something like this. Something ridiculous. Is like, you know, really extreme.
You know, it's funny, man, how sometimes you see fads or companies or whatever, they kind of come out a little bit aggressive and something changes along the way. Yeah. And it almost seems like that's what I'm noticing anyways. Like, I don't see as much of that controversy anymore. Maybe I just not keep my eyes open enough. I don't know.
I don't see a whole lot of it anymore either, you know. But you're right, you know, I could be missing it, but
I'll tell you, like, if I had to say how could it be better, right? How could it be better? I personally think that the CrossFit certification, like the level 1, level 1, go through this certain process of approval, and then you can be a CrossFit coach and teach people CrossFit. I find it incredibly subpar, and you know, this is coming from somebody obviously that runs a personal training school, so like obviously I'm gonna have my reservations, but
right.
how can you qualify somebody for the snatch and the clean and press, and not only qualify them, but qualify them to take on regular people to teach them, you know?
Right.
The only thing that I've heard from my CrossFit friends to defend that point is that, well, the level 1 is just an introduction, and that's all it is. Well, that introduction is allowing people to run CrossFit gyms, and it's allowing people to be CrossFit trainers.
Yeah.
And there's so many trainers that won't take it further than that.
Yeah, the vast majority, I think, it seems like to me, a very vast majority of CrossFit trainers just do the level 1 and that's it. Just they got their foot in the door, they can open up their box. Although, you know, while most of them maybe only have a level 1 certification, it probably is, you know, in all fairness, they probably do have a lot of other wealth of knowledge. A lot of them,
yeah.
You know, they do accumulate a huge wealth of knowledge outside of any official CrossFit certifications as well. So,
but well, you know, it's funny because like I said, I'm playing devil's advocate with that, because being in the personal training industry, certifying trainers, being around other certifications in schools and programs, the thing that I realized is, like, here I am like talking about CrossFit with that, but the reality is that's across the board with certifications. I mean, we see personal training certifications that are a weekend long, that are a joke, and you come out as a quote-unquote personal trainer with a piece of paper, and you're a joke, and you can't train people. You don't, but you're going around and, you know, telling people what they should do with confidence, when you really shouldn't be. And so it's not just CrossFit. I think I think when I say that, like, in my mind, it's the entire industry. It's like, we need to hold trainers, and that's CrossFit included, accountable. You know, you can't cut someone's hair without your state registered license in front of you, but I can run them to death in the park.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean?
Right. And this is very true. I remember in 2006 when I graduated from high school and I was going to college. Back then, you only needed a bachelor's degree to be a physical therapist.
Wow.
Now you need a PhD. It's time to raise the bar on personal training, right?
Yeah,
I mean, you know, the rest of everything is continuously raising the bar.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen, you know, there are more rigid standards in the restaurant industry than there are in the personal training industry, and this is the health. It's equally, you know, or more important. You know, these are people who are putting you through a program that could actually hurt you.
Yeah, and I think, you know, with CrossFit, with personal training, with fitness in general, people are going to start, and we're already seeing this. You know how many trainers that I know that just don't post their stuff to Facebook and whatnot, and I honestly think it's because people now, the public, are holding trainers accountable. You can't get away with just posting your client doing some broken back, you know, something or whatever. And you even mentioned that, you touched on that.
Yeah.
Now, don't get me wrong, like it can become like ridiculous. Like, we have everyone's a fucking professional now. So I get trolls. Yeah, I definitely get both sides. But man, like, I think that a lot of trainers or quote unquote professionals walk on ice because they maybe recognize that they don't fully know what they're doing, and the second that gets out there in the public, like, you're gonna be called out on it these days. This isn't just a, you know, I've had clients now that are fairly well versed in a lot of things, just with the internet and Facebook, you know.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the internet and Facebook has really, in a lot of the pages that I follow and watch on, the general public has a level of understanding that has gone up substantially in the last few years, you know, and unfortunately the standards for training have not gone up along with the elevated population, right? So it's time that we hold trainers to a higher accountability and standard, and just time to raise the bar, man.
For sure. Well, I guess this rant actually turned into a training / fitness industry thing, but yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I'll tell you, man, like, my little closing statement is just going to be that I as a personal trainer, as someone that has a lot of fitness experience, as an athlete, I absolutely have loved every second of doing CrossFit. I have enjoyed the crap out of the programming of it. So it challenged me as a professional. I've loved it as an athlete. It's pushed me harder. I feel more mobile, like I feel strong, I feel fast. I can do things that I feel like I got real robotic doing, training bodybuilding and physique. So I think that's great. Am I going to stand on a soapbox and recommend it to soccer moms trying to lose a couple pounds? I don't think I'm to that point yet. You know, I don't think I'm to that point. I love the idea that CrossFit is open to everybody, but at the same time, I have to consider the fact that is it an unnecessary risk as well for certain people or certain population. So.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I have to agree with that. I just hope that the fitness industry can mold in such a way that you know, with the way that you train the general public like that you can raise the intensity on them in a safe and you know, a well-programmed way, and that all goes along with what we were talking about. That's kind of, I think, how it all ties in, that elevating the level of knowledge on how to do that. You can't just haphazardly say, do 100 snatches to the soccer mom who's never done them before, you know. It's time to learn, you know, how to really get that person to an elevated level.
Okay, we out!